In today's video, I wanted to talk about what we'd like to see if the Astra Militarum were to see some updates for their aging infantry line. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for a bit of a discussion video focused around Imperial Guard Infantry and where Games Workshop might take them in the future. Aside from Tempestus Scions, it's been quite a while since Imperial Guard got any real attention in terms of new infantry kits, and indeed have lost many options along the way over the last decade or so. In the background, it's generally been the case that Imperial Guard Infantry have had very diverse and different fighting styles as they're drawn from all over the galaxy. Despite a lot of the line being represented in metal for quite some time, I think the Games Workshop did do a decent job of representing all the different fighting forces available to the Guard, and to be fair to them, there weren't really any other factions who had 7 or 8 different options to represent the same sort of infantry squads. It has been the case that a lot of the time Games Workshop has given the excuse to players that they can just use Cadian infantry because a lot of regiments across the galaxy supposedly copy their style, although I'm not 100% convinced this would hold quite as true now Cadia has essentially fallen and been destroyed. I know there were a lot of people who survived that and were on different planets that they'd colonised, but you'd still suspect it would have an impact. In general, I really don't think that the model line available to them really does a good job of representing the diversity that the Imperial Guard should probably have access to. Their only models in plastic are the Cadian and Catachan infantry squads, and both of these kits are really quite showing their age, to be honest. In particular, I think the Catachans do look a little bit cartoony, and have done basically ever since they were released. I've got nothing against the aesthetic, but the sculpts are just really quite simplistic compared with what they've done on other later Catachan sculpts or the Command Squad. I feel that the Cadians have aged a little bit better. They certainly have an iconic look, which is exactly what you think of when you think of an Imperial Guardsman. But again, the sculpts just really aren't the highest quality. I think they're really quite blocky and simplistic compared with a lot of later releases. Aside from these two kits, which are over 15 years old now, you have the option for the Death Corps, who would argue are possibly the best looking and best sculpted Imperial Guard regiment at the moment, but they are incredibly expensive, and a single squad of Steel Legion that still exists in metal, although there aren't any other options aside from that single squad. I do find it quite amusing that they're actually cheaper than the standard Cadian infantry squad now, which never used to be the case for metal. Most of the other regiments were axed fairly recently, including Valhallans, Vostroyans, Talons and Mordians, and the Elysians have also been retired from Forge World. Even the Death Corps have lost a fair few units, some of them fairly recently. Overall, besides the one release of the Scions kit, there hasn't really been a lot of good news for the Guard kits over the past decade. I think it's quite interesting that Guard used to be a faction that got a lot more love from Games Workshop than they do now. They have kind of received minimal updates over the past decade or so, but still despite this, they really do boast a pretty impressive model line compared with several other factions. I think the other factions are starting to catch up slowly, but in general Guard have enjoyed a decent amount of flexibility in terms of the numbers of units, armoured vehicles and support characters that they can deploy in battle. They've also enjoyed quite a lot of attention from Forge World as well, though this has potentially waned a bit over the past edition or so. I think it's a bit interesting to theorise as to why Games Workshop aren't showing the Guard quite as much love as they used to. In terms of their following, they do seem to have a really good amount of people who want to collect them. In my experience, numbers-wise, they seem to be one of the most popular factions for people to own, potentially second only to Space Marines themselves. Part of me wonders if Games Workshop just might not be releasing as many Guard kits, as they're just not quite as IP friendly. With just normal humans, there's nothing to stop any third-party company from making a futuristic-looking soldier with a laser rifle, and indeed many third-party companies seem to have stepped up to offer alternative parts, alternative heads, or entire models to fill gaps in the Guard range. You can buy squads that look very similar to Mordians, Vostroyans and Valhallans from places like Anvil Industries and Victoria Miniatures, for example. I do kind of wonder if this might be a chicken and egg scenario though, just because Games Workshop haven't covered those gaps themselves, so it allows anyone who is making things to cover those gaps to flourish. I suppose it could partly also be being put off by a bit of a big job and the opportunity cost being a bit too great. Maybe they just never get round to updating the regiments because they would want to do all of them at once, and in general that isn't going to be worth it compared with releasing more actual new units or updating other units from the many factions that they support. If the Guard infantry line was updated a bit, I'm genuinely unsure whether they would go for a new Cadian style miniature, or perhaps be a bit more adventurous and go for some of the other regiments. In the lore they certainly haven't been kind to the Cadians lately, in terms of Cadia actually being destroyed, killing off Colour Sergeant Kell, and having Creed be abducted by a Necron in the fall of Cadia. I'm genuinely unsure as to whether or not this is Games Workshop trying to get rid of Cadians in the lore a bit, to perhaps maybe bring some other regiment to the fore to be the face of the Imperial Guard, or whether they're setting up for some sort of triumph or return, maybe with the Guard retaking their lost homeworld. On the Catachan side, I have found it interesting that they've released a couple of new Catachan miniatures recently. This female Kaschan Sergeant on the right, and also that Kaschan Colonel, both of these were exclusive event miniatures I believe, though they gave the copies of the Colonel out to individual local gaming stores when they all had to shut down for the virus. I think it is interesting to see that Games Workshop are willing to revisit the Kaschan somewhat, though I'm not sure it's necessarily indicative that they might think about redoing the range anytime soon. They have also released miniatures for Zotes and Squats recently, so I don't think that we can guarantee to say that yes, this is part of some sort of great big Kaschan revival. If they were to revisit it though, I think they could do significantly better than the standard Kaschan infantry squad. The command squad itself is just so much better done, and to have entire armies of multi-part plastic kits like that would be really quite cool to see. Still very well muscled, but perhaps just a little bit less cartoonishly so. Another option that has sort of been floated around in the rumours of the internet for a long time is that they might at some point release a multi-part greatcoat kit, with which they might even be able to cover a couple of the other regiments, such as perhaps Steel Legion and Valhallans. You'd only really need a head swap to differentiate between the two of them. Steel Legion are really quite a popular regiment as it goes, which I suspect is why Games Workshop kept on their Steel Legion infantry squad when they ditched all of the other regiments. I honestly do think that they could just release a greatcoat kit for Steel Legion or Valhallans, and it will do quite well just on its own slotted into the guard range. I think that such a release would interest quite a lot of people. I must say I am just a little bit wary about them releasing new guard kits however. As you might have seen on the channel, I have a fair amount of guardsmen in my collection, and I wouldn't really like to have them either become suboptimal because they don't have the right gear, have their aesthetic entirely replaced, or even maybe go up to a different base size, which would be a bit of a nightmare for rebasing. So personally I will be just a little bit on the fence as to the release of a new guards kit. Obviously I like to have new cool models available, but it could be a bit of a painful blow losing quite a lot of infantry if Games Workshop changes everything a bit too radically. So what would you like to see out of a new guard infantry release, if and when it eventually happens? I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more 40k content each day. And if you've been enjoying my channel recently, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link, which is down in the video description below. If you were thinking about buying any models in the near future, and you'd like to help support the channel, then Element Games is a discount retailer within the UK that gives a decent amount off Warhammer 40k models. If you give the link a click before making an order, a small amount goes to help support the channel without costing you any more whatsoever at purchase, so it can be a way to help support the channel on things that you were going to buy anyway. I also have a very similar Amazon link for the USA and Canada. Again, that works pretty much the same. Give it a click and anything that you buy from Amazon will give a small amount to the channel and not cost you any more whatsoever. They do stock pretty much all of Games Workshop's range, but also the link works for anything else too. Again, can just be a way to help support on purchases that you were already planning to make. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.